Our Old Testament lesson this morning comes from Isaiah, chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. If you'd like to follow along, it's on page 634 in your pew Bibles. If you have your own Bible, I have no idea what page it's on. Isaiah put this parable into song so that it would be more easily learned and remembered. And in it, he tells of God's disappointment and pain when the fruits of his vineyard, which were the people of Jerusalem and Judah, were not the grapes of humility, meekness, patience, and love, but were instead the wild grapes of pride, discontent, malice, and contempt of God. So Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. Listen to God's word. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard than I have not done in it? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. So ends the reading.
The next scripture reading comes from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 29 through chapter 12, verse 2. Kind of one of the main themes and gist of Hebrews is talking to an early Christian group who was a little discouraged or disappointed. You know, Christ and others were saying that Christ would return, which he will, and we're still kind of waiting. So I think they were thinking the next day Christ would be back, but that didn't quite happen. So discouragement was kind of rampant at this time. So this kind of quelled some of that and calmed some fears. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea, as if it were dry land. But when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. Yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. And let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. Looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As a disappointment, right? Life's just abundant with it. Either we're disappointed in ourselves or disappointed in someone else. To be sure, we're bound to encounter some disappointment at some point in our life. We might finally drum up enough courage to try out for a sports team or a spot in the marching band, only to find out a few weeks later that whatever we did or maybe did not do was not good enough for us to make the team. Maybe we received a gift from someone we thought that was what we had wanted and asked for all along, only to find out it's just a year's worth of dental floss in a box. Perhaps we interviewed for a job or position that we've dreamed of ever since we were a child, only to find out there was another candidate that was apparently better suited for the job, or we may just never even hear at all. And maybe we had a very high, bordering on unrealistic expectations for a blind date, a child, a marriage, a boss, a job, a church, a life, or what have you. And then whenever those expectations are not met, we're bound to encounter certain levels of disappointment. It simply seems inevitable. You see, my most memorable moments of disappointment are almost too many to count. Sometimes I was disappointed in myself. Sometimes it was in or by other people. And one of the biggest and most memorable instances of this feeling occurred to me when I was in middle school. Prior to middle school, I had never really had a girlfriend before, and when I was making this sermon, my wife saw this paragraph and said, "You're not really supposed to have girlfriends before middle school anyway," so just a little quick preface for that. There you go. But unless you count that one girl I kissed ever so briefly and innocently in elementary school, I never had a girlfriend before. But upon entering middle school, I finally met a girl that I thought was the girl of my dreams. She was pretty, smart, sweet, funny, nice, and just a friendly and caring and thoughtful person. So throughout the course of the school year, we had a good conversation, enjoyed some projects that we worked on together. Eventually, I reached a point where I got it in my head that, hey, it might be pretty neat if I were to ask a girl to go to see a movie or to dinner or something, or if she was my girlfriend. Of course, I was never brave enough to ask her in person during the school year. And so as a result, I eventually acquired that phone number by sneakily requesting that she sign my beloved yearbook at the end of the year. Jackpot, I thought. I finally had her phone number. I would be able to get in touch with her over summer. What I did not realize, however, was just how much courage I would need to pick up the phone to give her a call. Eventually, somehow, some way, I worked up enough courage from that deep, down, hard-to-find recess of my being and picked up our phone one lazy summer afternoon. My palms were as sweaty as the first time that I preached. My heart was racing as if I had just swam right next to Michael Phelps in the Olympics. And my throat felt like it was closing up, as if I had some allergic reaction to the phone that I just put to my mouth. So nervously, I dialed the number, hoping in maybe the back part of my brain that nobody would even pick up. So after I finished putting in the 10-digit number, the phone on the other end rang once, and twice, and 3 times. "Hello?" I heard in that soft, sweet voice of hers. I froze for what felt like an eternity, mentally kicking myself for not thinking about what I would say would actually someone pick up the phone. And my hesitation almost led me to hang up immediately. But that deep courage urged me to push on and say at least something. "Hi, Brenda, this is Chris Kirwan. How are you?" "Good," she responded with just a little hint of question in her voice. "Well, that's good," I said. And then I just jumped straight to the question. "Hey, would you maybe want to go out with me sometime we could maybe catch a movie or go to dinner or something along those lines?" As I paused with my eyes closed, awaiting the response with bated breath, I heard the words that I was afraid to hear. "No thanks," she said. "Oh, okay, well, see you next year," I said, or something along those lines. Now, this was my first encounter with the sheer sting of disappointment and pain of outright rejection. Essentially, as with most experiences of disappointment, I began to ask myself some very personal and introspective questions. Ones along the lines of, what's wrong with me? Why didn't she like me? What could I have done better? Or am I just a weird kid? Did I say something that was off-putting or strange? Or what about me wasn't good enough? And needless to say, I thought about it for quite a few days after that. And as you can see, it still is somewhere in my memory banks. But having to go through that was not all that thrilling, to be honest. But as a pre-teen middle school boy, it certainly was excruciating. And I've often kind of wondered, especially at that time in my life, if I was the only one in the history of the world that had ever gone through anything like this. Certainly in my small little middle school mind and world, it certainly felt like it. I mean, who could I possibly tell or feel comfortable enough with sharing this humbling and vulnerable experience that I just went through? Now, certainly my options felt limited, as there was no one around that I felt that comfortable enough with. And so letting someone know how much I'd been hurt or discouraged by this simple telephone call felt excruciating and isolating. So despite my feeling at that time, there's actually one common thread that I found throughout history, among many others. But it's the realization that people have, in fact, faced disappointment, and some to a very great degree. It seems to be something that's rather unavoidable. When Christopher Columbus set sail in search of a western sea route for China, imagine his surprise when he discovers Cuba, but actually thinks it's China. I'm sure he was quite disappointed with that realization. When Thomas Edison had failed 10,000 times attempting to make a commercial light bulb, he certainly had to feel like a failure, I would imagine. Apparently, a reporter thought the same thing and even asked Mr. Edison if he felt like a failure. And Mr. Edison's response was, "Why would I feel like a failure? And why would I ever give up? I now know definitely over 9,000 ways an electric light bulb will not work." And needless to say, I certainly was not alone in experiencing the emptiness and draining feeling of disappointment. On top of that, we also have the accounts of those referenced in the Old Testament, found in today's excerpt that we read from Hebrews, and even some in Isaiah. And even throughout that disappointment and potential for great discouragement, the people remained faithful and continued to believe in God. You see, knowing that we're not alone in dealing with discouragement certainly helps. But there are also other pearls of wisdom that we can glean from understanding that fact, that others have been disappointed long before we even ever existed, and others will continue to be disappointed long after we're gone. You see, what has helped God's people deal with discouragement since the beginning is the knowledge that we are not alone. We follow in the footsteps of people from the earliest biblical times who were unsure of what the future held for them. We follow in the footsteps of the saints who along the way chose to trust God. We follow a God who does not abandon us in times of trouble. So when we follow the path of staying focused on Jesus Christ, our Savior, we're able to see joy in life despite that suffering. So in knowing this, and simply having this knowledge and understanding, it can certainly calm our own concerns and assist us in dealing with our own disappointment. In fact, one of the main pushing points of a group that we have here at the church called MOPS, or Mothers of Preschoolers, is that at its core, it's a support group. A one to let fellow mothers know that they are not alone. That they're not the only person in the world that struggles with a teething baby or a baby that doesn't sleep. They're not the only mother in the world that has to handle public tantrums or a child that does not always listen to what they have to say. And in that support, amidst that community, one begins to feel less like an outsider and more like they belong, and they can commiserate and talk and get support with a community of other like-minded people. They realize that there's not something wrong with them, and they're not a horrible parent. Or we understand that there's not anything we did that caused the girl to say no thanks to us on the phone. You see, knowing this and understanding this, one then becomes equipped with hope, a certain sense of faith, and a strong foundation to handle whatever may arrive and come to us in the future. And see, having that can prove to be invaluable. So some questions to consider from that insight might be, why should we have optimism about our future? Or do we have hope about the future? I feel that we certainly should on both accounts. In fact, with today's commissioning and celebrating of the early service, we did the preschool teachers and other Sunday school teachers, and then our Sunday school teachers at this service. We're given concrete reasons that even if we're unable to change our own future, or have a sense of optimism about our own, at least, and at the very least, maybe we could look to all the children and other people and see that they deserve hope. They deserve optimism. They deserve a future that's filled to the brim of joy, peace, love, and support. Yes, they may experience disappointment, and maybe on some levels that's okay, as long as one remains hopeful about the future. Yes, it's all our responsibility to guide the children and get them to that point, where they know that if they pick up a phone and invite a friend over to play, their world won't be shattered if they hear the words, "no thanks." We should know that it's okay sometimes to fail, as long as we continue to persevere and keep on trying. And we should also know that God, too, has proven to remain faithful and present with us in times of despair, disappointment, and discouragement, and even through the failure of God's own people. So what this all boils down to then is the theme of the day. The one simple word that begins with the letter E, endurance. See, occasionally in life we're called to endure and forced to endure. We have to persevere through 10,000 incorrect light bulbs. We have to stomach and hear the words of rejection from someone we're not hoping to hear those words from. Or we may feel like we're treading water and traveling through this journey of life all alone, without a life raft, and without God or maybe even others by our side. So throughout all of the ups and the downs of life, the ultimate hope is that we learn to deal with the times of disappointment, and that we are better off to face them in the future whenever they may come again. But how then does one grow this endurance? Quite simply, it takes time. I recall many moons ago when I was playing soccer, and I would actually attempt to run and get in shape for my upcoming soccer season. Initially, my endurance was quite low, and I could maybe run a mile or a mile and a half max before I was completely gassed and exhausted. However, if I kept at it and would run regularly and stay disciplined enough, my endurance would slowly grow. But if I neglected it, my endurance would sink back to what it was before I even started training. You see, as a result, we need to hear words of support on a regular basis. We need to continue to build and cultivate relationships with other people so that we know we're not alone. We need to continue to look for, find, and see God, despite how discouraged or disappointed we may get. And we need to be able to see a bright future amidst all the muck, the mire, and the darkness that we may be feeling, experience, or seeing in our life or someone else's. You see, maybe one of the best ways to minimize and handle our current, past, or inevitable disappointment is to keep our eye on possible hope and joy of the future. The best example of this is, of course, Jesus Christ. You see, Christ on the cross was not consumed with the pain of the moment, as great as it was, but he kept an eye on the joy that would come when he went to heaven and was seated with the Father. In the same way, we are to look to Jesus Christ, as staying in tune with what is going on around us and not ignoring the pain that we and others might be feeling. However, as Christ looked to heaven, we are to look to Christ. The Hebrews text in chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. It calls us to run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus. You see, therein lies the true solution. Our endurance and our strength and our perseverance lies in Jesus Christ. For if he were able to accept his crucifixion and understand a future of both hope and joy, then we too can look to him to gain strength for anything and anything that we might endure, and most certainly overcome any and all disappointment. Amen.